Alex had always preferred the solitude of his mountain cabin. Nestled deep in the heart of the snow-covered peaks, the little wooden house was the perfect retreat for someone who valued peace and quiet. The world outside seemed far away, like a distant memory, with only the wind and the occasional sound of animals breaking the silence. On that particular evening, the sky was a deep shade of purple, with the last hints of sunlight fading behind the mountains. A heavy blanket of snow covered the ground, and the air had a crispness to it that made Alex feel alive. He sat near the fireplace, a book in his hands, the crackling fire providing warmth and light. It was one of those peaceful nights when the world seemed at rest, until something strange happened. Alex had just turned a page in his book when he heard a loud thud, followed by a faint thumping sound. He froze, his eyes darting toward the door, unsure of what he'd just heard. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. There wasn't supposed to be anyone out there, at least not in this remote part of the mountains. Curious and slightly on edge, Alex set the book down and stood up, his boots crunching on the wooden floor. He approached the door slowly, the wind outside howling softly against the walls of the cabin. When he opened it, a wave of cold air hit him, but what he saw made his heart race. Lying in the snow, just a few feet from the cabin door, was a figure, a woman, though her appearance was unlike anything Alex had ever seen. Her skin shimmered in the dim light, a shade of blue that seemed almost unnatural against the backdrop of the snow. Her long silver hair lay spread out in the snow, her body limp and unmoving. Without thinking, Alex rushed outside, his instincts taking over. He knelt beside the woman, checking for signs of life. Her breathing was shallow, and she felt cold to the touch, colder than anyone he had ever encountered. She was shivering, though she didn't seem to be aware of it. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of the situation. Who was she? How had she ended up here? With a grunt, Alex carefully lifted her up, feeling the odd weight of her body, as if she were too light for someone of her size. He half-carried, half-dragged her inside the cabin, pushing the door shut behind him. The warmth of the fire hit him in an instant, but it did little to ease the strange unease he felt. He laid her down on the couch, wrapping a blanket around her to try and warm her up. As he checked her over, he noticed more details that made him even more confused. Her clothes were unlike anything he had seen, sleek and metallic, as if designed for some kind of high-tech environment. Her face was delicate, with sharp features, but there was an otherworldly quality to it, as if she didn't belong on Earth at all. Alex stepped back and ran a hand through his hair, trying to collect his thoughts. He wasn't sure what to do. The situation felt too strange, too out of place for him to handle alone. He glanced at the window, noting that the storm was growing stronger. The snow had picked up, and the winds outside howled with increasing intensity. It seemed like a perfect storm was on its way, making it impossible for Alex to leave the cabin until it passed. He stood over the woman, watching her carefully. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but she didn't stir. What if she was injured? What if she needed help? But what kind of help would he be able to provide? He had no medical training, no idea how to deal with someone who wasn't even human. The fire crackled in the background as Alex stared at the strange woman, feeling both compelled and afraid. He couldn't leave her out there in the storm. He knew that much. He thought about calling for help, but his cabin was miles from the nearest town, and there was no phone signal in this part of the mountains. It was just him and her. For a moment, Alex debated what to do next. He could try to wake her up, but would she be hostile? What if she wasn't even from Earth? The thought sent a chill down his spine. Still, he couldn't leave her unconscious on the couch. He had to do something. He leaned down carefully, his hand brushing the woman's arm. To his surprise, she didn't react. Her skin was unnaturally cold, almost freezing to the touch. He recoiled for a moment but quickly forced himself to steady his nerves. She was still alive. That much was clear, but he had no idea what kind of creature she was or where she had come from. Suddenly, a low sound escaped her throat, a soft, almost inaudible moan. Alex stepped back, startled. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing a vibrant shade of violet, almost glowing in the dim light of the cabin. For a moment, she stared at him, confusion filling her gaze. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, like a soft breeze. Her eyes locked with his, and something inside Alex stirred. He felt a strange sense of connection, but he couldn't explain why. I'm Alex," he replied, his voice unsteady. "I found you outside. You were unconscious." The woman's eyes darted around the cabin, her gaze lingering on the fire for a moment. She shivered again, her body visibly trembling. "I need warmth," she said softly, her voice still fragile. Alex blinked, unsure of what she meant, but he could see the desperation in her eyes. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was asking for something more. The woman's violet eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the cabin, and Alex couldn't look away. He wasn't sure what to make of her. Her strange appearance, her otherworldly presence, and the coldness that radiated off her. But one thing was clear: she was not from around here, and she needed help. She trembled as her body shook uncontrollably, her skin still icy cold. Alex had already wrapped her in a blanket, but it didn't seem to do much to ease her discomfort. She had no visible wounds, no sign of injury, yet something about her state made Alex uneasy. What kind of creature was she? What was happening to her? "Warmth," she whispered again, her voice barely audible, the word lingering in the air like a plea. She raised her trembling hand toward the fire, but she didn't seem to understand the difference between warmth and heat. Alex watched, perplexed, as her fingers hovered near the flames but didn't quite touch them. The fire crackled, but there was no visible effect on her. Instead, the fire flickered as if reacting to her presence, growing brighter, more intense, but also strangely erratic. Alex moved cautiously closer, trying to make sense of her situation. "It's warm," he said softly, "but you need to get closer if you want to feel it." The woman, who Alex now knew was named Irina, didn't respond at first. She simply stared at the fire, her expression filled with confusion. It was as if she couldn't comprehend the concept of warmth as Alex understood it. She shifted her position, trying to edge closer to the fire, but her body seemed unable to absorb its heat the way he had expected. Alex watched, torn between curiosity and concern. He had never seen anything like this before. He stepped forward to offer help, but when his hand touched her arm, the coldness shocked him. It wasn't the chill of a normal winter night. It was something much deeper, much more unnatural. He pulled his hand back quickly, but he couldn't just leave her like this. He had to figure out what she needed. "Why are you so cold?" he asked, his voice gentle. For a moment, Irina didn't speak, her eyes still fixed on the flames, though she didn't seem to get any closer to them. Her silence made Alex wonder if she even understood his question. I can't feel the warmth," she murmured at last. "My body, it doesn't work like yours. I need more, much more." Alex didn't know how to help her. He had read about strange phenomena in books and seen movies with alien creatures, but this felt real, too real. He didn't know anything about otherworldly biology, and he had no way of knowing if there was even a chance for her to survive. Her words hung in the air, and Alex felt a pang of sympathy. She seemed so vulnerable, so lost in a world so different from her own. She wasn't just asking for comfort, she was desperate. He could feel it in his gut. She was struggling, and whatever she needed, it was more than he could give with his limited knowledge of the world. Irina let out a soft sigh, almost like a sound of defeat. Her body sagged against the couch as if her strength had begun to drain away. Alex quickly moved to her side, kneeling down to look at her more closely. Her skin was almost glowing now, shimmering in the low light, but it was a cold, unnatural kind of glow. It was as if her body was desperately trying to pull in energy, but she couldn't find a way to process it. "Please," she whispered again, "I need warmth." Alex's mind raced as he tried to think of a solution. There was no way he could provide her with the kind of warmth she was asking for. The fire in the cabin, while comfortable for him, clearly wasn't enough for her. He could offer her more blankets, more heat from the fire, but would it be enough? A sudden idea struck him. The storm outside was intensifying, and the temperatures were dropping even further. The cabin might have been warm, but it wasn't going to last forever. If she truly couldn't absorb normal warmth, perhaps there was something else he could try. He needed to help her now, before the cold overtook them both. "Stay here," Alex said quickly, standing up. He moved toward the back of the cabin, pulling open a small storage closet where he kept extra firewood. He grabbed a few logs and tossed them into the fire, trying to stoke the flames higher. The fire crackled and flared up, but it was clear that it wasn't enough to solve the problem. He needed more. He needed a different approach. As he looked around, something caught his eye. The small space heater he used during the worst of the cold nights. It wasn't much, but it could add extra warmth to the cabin. And perhaps it could make a difference for Irina. He moved quickly, setting up the heater and turning it on high, hoping it would help her. But even as the room began to warm, he could see that it wasn't enough. Irina's body still seemed frozen, her breath shallow, her skin too cold to the touch. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he realized that this was something far beyond anything he could handle. She wasn't just cold, her entire system was out of sync with the environment around her. Irina let out a soft, almost mournful sound as she looked at Alex, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know how to survive here. My body, it can't adapt." Alex's heart clenched. He had no answers, no quick fixes, and he couldn't let her suffer. The fear in her eyes mirrored the same uncertainty Alex was feeling, and he knew that without finding a way to help her, things would only get worse. Her struggle to survive wasn't just physical, it was a fight against an environment that didn't understand her needs. In that moment, Alex made a decision. He would figure out a way to help her. He wouldn't leave her to freeze in this strange, isolated place. No matter how strange or frightening the situation became, he would be there for her, as long as it took. The storm outside raged louder with each passing minute, the wind howling through the trees and battering against the cabin walls. Inside, the warmth from the fire and the space heater was doing little to ease Irina's struggle. Alex sat by her side, feeling helpless. No matter how much warmth he tried to offer her, it was as if she could not absorb it properly. Her body shivered uncontrollably, and her violet eyes were wide with fear and confusion. "Why won't it work?" Irina whispered weakly, her voice trembling. She reached out a hand to the fire again, her fingers brushing the flames without any effect. The fire crackled and flickered, but there was no warmth in her touch. Her body felt as if it was rejecting the heat, as if something inside her couldn't process it. Alex watched, frustrated and unsure. You're not from here, are you?" Alex asked quietly, his voice almost a whisper. It seemed like a silly question now, given everything that had happened, but he needed to understand. He needed to know what was going on. Irina's eyes met his, and for the first time since she had woken up, she looked almost relieved, as if she had been waiting for someone to ask the question. She took a deep breath and spoke, her words slow and deliberate, as if trying to find the right way to explain. "No," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the crackling of the fire. "I'm not from here. I'm from a distant place, far beyond this world." Alex's heart skipped a beat. He had known on some level that she wasn't human, but hearing her confirm it brought a wave of both awe and fear. He had seen alien creatures in movies, read about them in books, but this was real. And now she was here, in his cabin, stranded and struggling to survive. "I don't understand," Alex said, his voice thick with confusion. How did you get here? What happened? Irina looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. She seemed to be gathering her thoughts, but the struggle was clear in her expression. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time, as though sharing something deeply personal. My people, we live on a planet where everything is hot. Extreme heat, all the time, she explained. Our bodies have evolved to thrive in that heat. We can absorb and store it, use it for energy. It's how we survive. But here, she gestured weakly to the room, to the cold air, the snow outside. It's too cold for me. My body doesn't know how to adapt. I need more heat, but this world, this atmosphere, it doesn't give me what I need. Alex's mind raced as he processed what she had said. It all made sense now. The coldness, the way she had been unable to absorb the warmth from the fire, the way her body rejected it. She was a creature of heat, not cold. The thought made Alex shiver. No wonder she had been struggling so much. Her body was completely out of sync with this planet. So, you're from a planet of fire? Alex asked, still trying to wrap his mind around it. Irina nodded slowly. Yes, we come from a place where the heat never ends. We thrive in it. But when we crash-landed here, I didn't know how to survive. I thought I could adapt. But my body, it's failing. Alex felt a surge of sympathy for her. She had no way of knowing how cold Earth could be, how completely different the environment was from what she was used to. It was no wonder she couldn't handle the cold. Is there any way to help you? Alex asked, his voice almost pleading. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit there and watch her suffer. He had no experience with alien biology, but he couldn't bear the thought of her being in pain. Irina shook her head weakly. I don't know. I've never been in a place like this before. I thought the heat from your fire would be enough. But it's not. She paused, her eyes looking distant for a moment, as if lost in her own thoughts. I'm not like you, she said quietly, almost to herself. I don't belong here. I shouldn't be here. Alex's heart ached as he watched her struggle. He didn't know what to say. He was just an ordinary guy from Earth, and now he was faced with an alien who needed something he couldn't give. But he wasn't about to give up. There had to be a way to help her. Is there anything that can help? He asked, his voice firm with determination. Any way to make you feel better? Irina's eyes flickered, as if the question had sparked something in her mind. She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. There is one thing, she said slowly, but it's dangerous. Alex's curiosity piqued. Dangerous? How? Irina took a shaky breath. I can absorb more heat than what your fire provides. I can absorb the energy from the world around me, the heat from the earth itself. But it's overwhelming. It's like taking in too much all at once. My body can't handle it unless I focus, unless I learn to control it. If I don't, it could destroy everything around me. Alex's eyes widened. So you can harness heat from the planet, from the environment? Irina nodded. Yes, but it's a power that I've never used before. It's dangerous because if I lose control, I could cause destruction. And right now, I don't know if I can control it. Alex thought about it for a moment. But if it works, you could survive. You could adapt. Irina's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Yes, but it's a risk, a big one. Alex didn't hesitate. He knew he had no choice. He had to help her. Whatever the risk, he couldn't let her die in his cabin. We'll figure it out together, he said with resolve. We'll make sure you're okay. Irina looked at him, and for the first time, a small, hopeful smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Thank you, she whispered, her voice soft, but filled with gratitude. I didn't think anyone would help me. Alex smiled back. We're in this together. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft crackling of the fire and the occasional gust of wind that rattled the windows. Alex sat across from Irina, his mind racing with what she had told him. The idea that she could absorb heat from the planet was both incredible and terrifying. But it was the only chance she had. He had to help her control it, somehow. Irina was lying back on the couch, still covered in blankets, her eyes closed as she seemed to focus. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Her body was trying to adjust, to find a way to cope with the cold. The more Alex thought about it, the more he realized how fragile her situation was. This wasn't just about surviving the storm. It was about her entire existence, her very ability to live on this planet. "Are you ready?" Alex asked, his voice steady but tinged with concern. He wasn't sure what they were about to do, but he knew they had to try. Irina opened her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze. "I'm not sure," she admitted quietly, "but I don't have a choice." Her voice carried a weight of determination, but there was also fear. The unknown was always daunting, and the power she was about to attempt was something she had never used before. If she lost control, she could end up hurting herself, or worse, destroying everything around her. The thought made Alex's heart race, but he couldn't let fear stop them. "Let's take it slow," he suggested, hoping to ease the tension between them. "We'll go step by step. I'll be right here." Irina nodded, her eyes still clouded with uncertainty. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "All right, I'll try." Alex watched her carefully as she sat up, her hands resting on her lap. Her silver hair shimmered faintly in the low light of the cabin, and her violet eyes glowed ever so slightly, reflecting the fire. She looked both fragile and strong at the same time, as if she was on the edge of something powerful yet uncontrollable. Irina closed her eyes again, and for a long moment there was silence. Alex could see her focusing, trying to gather whatever strength she had left. The room seemed to grow colder in the stillness, the air pressing in on him. He felt the weight of the moment. This was a turning point. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling louder, but inside the cabin there was only the quiet hum of anticipation. Suddenly, Irina's eyes snapped open. "I can feel it," she whispered, her voice low but filled with a new intensity. "The heat, it's there, just beneath the surface. I can reach it." Alex leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Can you control it?" She nodded, her hands starting to glow faintly with a soft blue light. "I think so, but I need to focus." He watched in awe as her hands began to warm, the light growing brighter. The glow spread up her arms until it reached her shoulders. Irina's whole body seemed to vibrate with energy, but there was something unsettling about it. The heat radiating from her wasn't the gentle warmth of a fire. It was something more intense, like the power of a storm waiting to be unleashed. "Careful," Alex cautioned, his voice filled with concern. "Don't overdo it." Irina's expression was one of fierce concentration, her jaw clenched as she held her energy in check. Slowly, the heat seemed to calm, the glow fading a little as she regained control. She took a shaky breath, her eyes flickering with exhaustion. "I can't do this for long," she admitted, her voice strained. It's like trying to hold back a flood. The more I take in, the harder it is to keep it contained." Alex nodded. He could see how difficult it was for her. This wasn't just a physical struggle, it was mental too. She was fighting against her own instincts, trying to learn how to control a force she had never experienced. "We'll go slow," Alex said, his voice soft but reassuring. "Just focus on the heat. Let it come to you, but don't force it. Let your body adjust." Irina closed her eyes again, breathing deeply. The soft glow returned to her hands, and Alex could see her focus growing stronger. He stayed close, his eyes never leaving her as she worked through the process. The temperature in the room began to rise, ever so slightly, but Alex could feel it. The heat was starting to fill the space, but it was gentle, controlled. For several minutes, there was only the sound of Irina's steady breathing and the crackling fire. The cabin warmed slowly, the temperature rising just enough for Alex to feel a small comfort. But it wasn't just the cabin that was warming. It was Irina herself. Her skin, which had been icy and stiff, began to feel a little softer, warmer. Irina opened her eyes, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I think it's working," she said, her voice much stronger than before. "I can feel the heat inside me. It's not overwhelming anymore. I can control it." Alex smiled with relief. He had been so worried, but now there was hope. She had done it. She had tapped into the power within her and had learned how to harness it, even if just for a short time. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time since she had arrived at the cabin, Alex felt like they were making progress. "That's amazing," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You did it." Irina nodded, but her expression was still serious. "It's not over yet. I need more time, more control. But this is the first step." The energy in the room seemed to settle as Irina relaxed, her glowing hands dimming. The warmth she had summoned lingered in the air, filling the cabin with a sense of calm and peace. Alex could see that the struggle wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead. But in that moment, they had made progress. Irina had taken the first step toward survival, and for the first time, Alex believed she might have a chance. He walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're strong," he said quietly. "You're going to make it." Irina looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Alex. I couldn't have done it without you." And for the first time since she had arrived, Alex felt like everything was going to be all right. The fire crackled softly in the hearth as Alex watched Irina sit in silence, her body still glowing faintly with the heat she had summoned. The room was warm now, but not in the same way it had been before. The warmth felt different, more alive, almost as though it had a presence of its own. Irina had made progress, but Alex knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. Irina shifted slightly on the couch, her fingers still faintly glowing, though the light had dimmed. She was breathing slowly, deliberately, but Alex could see the strain in her face. She had barely managed to harness the power for a few moments, but the effort had drained her. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "How are you feeling?" Alex asked gently, not wanting to pressure her but needing to know if she was okay. Irina took a deep breath, her violet eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Tired," she whispered, "but I'm not giving up. I can feel it inside me. The heat, the power. I just need more time." Alex nodded, understanding. He couldn't imagine what it was like for her, trying to adjust to this strange new world and learn how to control the energy coursing through her. He couldn't help but admire her determination. She had come so far in such a short amount of time, and he knew she wasn't ready to stop now. "I know," Alex said, offering her a reassuring smile. "Take all the time you need. We're in this together." Irina looked up at him, her expression softening for a moment. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but filled with gratitude. I'm not used to relying on others. I've always had to depend on myself, but with you here, it feels different. It feels like I'm not alone." Alex felt a pang in his chest at her words. He knew how isolating it could be to feel like you didn't belong, to be out of place in a world that wasn't your own. But he also knew that they had something important here, something that was growing stronger with each passing moment. He wouldn't let her go through this alone, not after everything they had been through. "You're not alone, Irina," Alex said firmly, his voice full of conviction. "You've got me. I'll help you. We'll figure this out together." For a brief moment, Irina looked at him as though weighing his words. Then she gave a small nod, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Together," she repeated softly. The room fell silent once again, but this time, the quiet was different. It wasn't tense or filled with uncertainty. There was a sense of calm now, a sense of purpose. Irina closed her eyes, and Alex could see her focusing again, trying to summon the energy she had tapped into earlier. For a long time, nothing happened. The only sound was the soft hum of the space heater in the corner and the crackling of the fire. But then, just as Alex was beginning to wonder if she had reached her limit, Irina's body seemed to hum with energy. Her hands glowed again, brighter this time, the blue light spreading up her arms like electricity. Irina's breath caught in her throat as the energy swirled around her. And for a moment, Alex thought she might lose control. The temperature in the room shot up suddenly, the air becoming thick with heat. Alex felt his own skin prickle as the warmth intensified. But this time, it wasn't as gentle as before. It felt more raw, more powerful. Irina's glow was almost blinding, and Alex could see her struggling to maintain control. "Irina," Alex called, his voice sharp with concern. "Slow down. You need to control it." But Irina's eyes were squeezed shut, her body trembling as if fighting the overwhelming power within her. Sweat poured down her face as she tried to rein in the heat. Alex could see her fingers twitching, the light around her flickering with an intensity that made him worry for her safety. "I can't stop it," Irina gasped, her voice strained. "It's too much. I don't know how to control it." Panic bubbled up inside Alex. He had never seen anything like this before, and the danger of it was real. He had to do something, anything, to help her regain control. He rushed to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Irina, listen to me," Alex said urgently. "You can do this. Focus on one thing, one small thing. Don't try to control it all at once." Irina's eyes flickered open, and she looked at him, her expression wild with fear. The blue light still pulsed around her like a storm, but Alex could see a glimmer of recognition in her eyes. She was listening. "Focus on the warmth inside you," Alex continued, trying to keep his voice calm. "Feel it, but don't let it overwhelm you. Take it one step at a time." Irina nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Slowly, the glow around her hands began to fade, and the room began to cool. It wasn't immediate, but the temperature started to return to a more manageable level. Irina's body slumped, exhausted, but the light in her hands dimmed, and the raw energy subsided. Alex didn't move, his hand still resting on her shoulder as he watched her with concern. "You did it," he said quietly, relief flooding through him. Irina looked at him with wide eyes, her face pale but determined. I did," she whispered. "I was afraid I'd lose control. But you were right. I need to focus, one step at a time." Alex smiled, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. She had done it. She had taken a huge step forward. The power inside her was immense, but with control, she could harness it without destroying everything around her. "You're getting stronger," Alex said, his voice warm with pride. "I knew you could do it." Irina smiled back, the glow in her eyes softening. "Thank you, Alex. I couldn't have done it without you." For the first time since she had arrived at the cabin, Alex felt a sense of hope. They were getting closer. Irina was learning to control the heat inside her, and together they would face whatever challenges came next. But deep down, Alex knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be hard, but they were no longer alone in it. Together, they could face whatever the future held. The storm outside had not let up. The wind howled against the walls of the cabin, and snow piled higher with each passing hour. Inside, the fire continued to crackle, its warm glow casting dancing shadows on the walls. But the atmosphere inside the cabin felt different now. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, thick with the promise of something important unfolding. Irina sat near the window, her gaze fixed on the swirling snowstorm outside. Her body was still tired from her earlier efforts, but there was a spark of determination in her eyes that had not been there before. She had made incredible progress in controlling her heat, but she knew the true test was still ahead. The energy inside her was vast, powerful, and unpredictable. If she didn't learn how to control it completely, it could spiral out of control once more. Alex paced slowly behind her, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his jacket. He wasn't sure what to do next. Every time he thought they were making progress, Irina's powers seemed to push the limits of what was possible. It wasn't just about the heat anymore. It was about everything she was capable of. And every time she used her abilities, it seemed like there was more to learn, more to master. He stopped near her, watching her for a moment before speaking. "How are you feeling?" His voice was gentle, but his concern was clear. Irina didn't turn to face him immediately. She seemed lost in thought, her eyes still locked on the storm outside. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice low. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I can feel it inside me. The heat, the power, it's still there, always there. But I'm not in control of it, not fully. What if I lose it again? What if I can't control it the next time?" Alex could hear the fear in her voice, and it tugged at his heart. He knew how dangerous it was for her to try to wield such power, but he also knew that running from it wasn't an option. If she wanted to survive on Earth, if she wanted to stay alive, she had to learn to control it. There was no other choice. "You've come so far already," Alex said, his voice filled with confidence. "You've controlled it before, and you can do it again. This time, we'll take it slower, step by step. We'll figure it out." Irina slowly turned to face him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Step by step," she repeated softly, nodding as if trying to reassure herself. "All right. But what if? What if I can't control it? What if it hurts you?" Alex smiled at her, trying to put her at ease. "You won't hurt me. I know you won't. You're stronger than you think." She hesitated for a moment, her fingers twitching at her sides as if instinctively wanting to tap into her power. After a few more breaths, she nodded again. "Okay, I'll try." Alex moved away from the window, giving her space to work. The firelight reflected off his face as he kept his focus on her. "I'll be right here," he reassured her. "Just remember, don't push yourself too hard. If it gets too much, we'll stop." Irina's eyes closed as she took a deep breath, her hands resting on her lap. The room grew quiet, the only sound the faint howling of the wind outside. Alex watched her carefully, his heartbeat quickening as he wondered if this time would be different. Then he saw it, the soft blue glow that had become familiar, starting at her fingertips. It wasn't as intense this time, but the energy was unmistakable. Slowly, the light spread up her arms, casting a calm, cool glow in the dim room. The temperature in the cabin began to rise again, but it was gentle this time, like the warmth of the sun after a long winter. Irina's face was focused, her brow furrowed as she concentrated on controlling the heat. She exhaled slowly, the warmth in the air growing more noticeable. The soft hum of energy filled the room, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was controlled, steady, a far cry from the chaotic bursts of energy from earlier. Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he watched her. She had come so far, learning how to control this incredible force. He could see the progress she had made in just a short time. The glow around her hands pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, steady and calm. For the first time, Alex felt like they were on the right path. This wasn't just a survival instinct anymore. It was mastery. "Good," Alex said softly, his voice filled with pride. "You're doing it." Irina's eyes fluttered open, a small, exhausted smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I think I have it. I can feel it inside me. The heat. It's mine to control." Alex smiled back, but he didn't let his guard down completely. "Let's keep going. We're not done yet." Irina nodded and closed her eyes again, this time more confidently. Her breathing slowed as she focused, the soft blue glow becoming more solid. She was controlling it now, each pulse of heat measured and intentional. The warmth filled the cabin, but it didn't feel overpowering. It felt like a soft embrace, like a summer breeze on a warm afternoon. But as Irina concentrated, the glow flickered for just a moment, and Alex could see her shoulders tense. The warmth began to fluctuate, growing hotter before suddenly cooling again. Irina gasped, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. "No," she muttered to herself, trying to regain control. "I've got this. Focus." Alex stepped closer, his voice calm and steady. "You're doing great. Just take a breath. Don't fight it." Irina closed her eyes tighter, and for a moment, everything seemed still. Then, just as quickly as the fluctuations began, they stopped. The energy around her hands steadied, the temperature in the room stabilizing once more. Irina opened her eyes, and this time, the smile on her face was genuine, filled with relief. "I did it," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "I actually did it." Alex walked over to her, his heart full of pride. "You did. You've got this." The two of them stood there for a long moment, the warmth from Irina's power filling the space between them. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, there was peace. They had taken another step forward together. Irina looked at him, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me." Alex smiled back, his heart full. Always, and for the first time since they had met, Alex felt like everything was going to be okay. The road ahead was still uncertain, but together they could face whatever came their way. The morning light filtered through the small cabin windows, casting warm golden beams across the wooden floor. The snowstorm outside had finally slowed, leaving the world wrapped in a soft, quiet blanket of white. Inside, the cabin was calm, filled with the quiet crackling of the fire and the faint hum of energy still lingering in the air. Alex sat by the window, looking out at the peaceful landscape. His mind was still racing, trying to process everything that had happened. So much had changed in such a short time. His life had gone from ordinary to extraordinary, all because of one chance encounter. He could hardly believe how much Irina had grown since she arrived at the cabin. The woman who had once seemed so fragile and uncertain was now a force to be reckoned with, someone who could control the incredible power within her. Beside him, Irina sat on the couch, her eyes closed in concentration. Her hands were resting in her lap, but Alex could feel the soft warmth radiating from her, as though she had learned to control her powers completely. Her breathing was steady, calm, as she focused on maintaining the balance she had worked so hard to achieve. "You've come a long way," Alex said softly, breaking the silence. "I'm proud of you." Irina opened her eyes and smiled, a sense of peace in her expression. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied quietly. "You helped me find my way. I've never trusted anyone like this before." Alex smiled back at her, his heart full. "I'm glad I could be here. You've made it this far because of your strength, Irina. I'm just happy to be a part of it." She nodded, her gaze softening as she looked at him. "I know. I think I finally understand. It's not just about controlling the power. It's about understanding it, accepting it, and knowing how to live with it." Alex turned back to the window, his thoughts drifting. The mountains outside looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos of the world. He couldn't help but feel that the storm outside had been a reflection of the internal struggle Irina had faced. It had been wild, unpredictable, and overwhelming at times. But just like the calm after the storm, it felt like they had reached a new beginning, a fresh start. "Do you think we'll ever be able to return to normal?" Alex asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I mean, after everything that's happened." Irina's gaze shifted to the window as well, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what it was before. But I think we can move forward. I think we can create a new kind of normal. Together." Alex turned to look at her, surprised by the strength in her words. There was a quiet confidence in her now, a steadiness that hadn't been there when they first met. She was no longer just a woman trying to survive in a strange world. She was someone who had found her place in it, someone who had learned to adapt, to control and to trust. "I agree," Alex said, his voice steady. "We can create something new, something better." Irina stood slowly, stretching as she walked to the window, standing next to Alex. For a moment, the two of them just stood there, side by side, looking out at the snow-covered world. It felt peaceful, almost like a dream, and Alex realized that, despite everything that had happened, they had made it through together. "Do you ever wonder what's out there?" Irina asked softly, breaking the silence. "What other challenges await us?" Alex glanced at her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've thought about it," he said, "but I don't think it matters. Whatever's out there, we'll face it together. We've made it this far, and we'll keep going." Irina smiled, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "Together." Alex nodded, his heart swelling with warmth. He had never felt more certain of anything in his life. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was she. They had both found something in each other, something more powerful than any force or ability. They had found trust, and with it, the courage to face whatever came next. As the snow continued to fall outside, Alex and Irina stood there, side by side, looking out at the world that had changed so much. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were ready. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The storm had passed, and the warmth between them was enough to light the way forward.